They repeat some errors that go all the way back to the 1890s.
But is there anybody out there that kind of puts their imprimatur on textbooks that say, okay, this one's all right, that one isn't? And if they do that, who are they?
That's a good question. In one sense, no, there isn't. That is, you would think the history profession might, or there might be a review journal. Basically, history textbooks are not reviewed, at least high school textbooks. Even college textbooks are generally not reviewed.
Did you hear that? History textbooks, college, high school, they're not reviewed. So they're written, and there's no committee that sits around and says, all right, this is factual, this is non-factual. I thought it was just interesting.
By anybody. The history profession considers them a little bit dirty. That is, like, if I were a historian and I were applying for a new job at the University of Washington and I'm already at the University of Vermont, the fact that I might have written a history textbook would not count in my favor. If I'm looking for tenure, if I'm looking for advancement, they are looking, the deans and the history departments, they are looking for me to write a wonderful monograph on Andrew Jackson or whatever my wonderful monograph is about. They're not looking...
And we have all that proof. Come on, tell me, how many times have you come across literature or you just come across these books and they always paint Andrew Jackson as a heroic hero, no matter who it is. They really don't like to paint him as the person he was. They don't want to give you too much information on him or too much dirt on the guy. It's a lot of people whose ancestors were victimized by the man. They're the ones that come out writing and telling us, oh, no, this right here is not it, you know. They're trying to give us just the cream of the crop all the time, you know.
For a textbook. They consider them kind of dirty, kind of done for profit. At the University of Vermont, the former dean made a distinction between scholarship and what he called pedagogy. And textbooks would fit under that latter heading, and get very little credit. And the same holds even for the review journals. They're busy, they take their time writing reviews of monographs. They do not bother reviewing textbooks, particularly high school textbooks.
When was the first time you ever got interested in history?
You gotta think about it too. High school, really, you think about it, some middle school, but high school is where you're really gonna get the history that basically sticks with you for the rest of your life. Because I mean, there's not too many people, you know, that like myself, that you're in high school and you like history more than you like any other subjects, you know, or you like sociology more than any other subjects, you know. Like people prefer to shy away from that and they'll take up, you know, science or math or, you know, these other areas where it's quite a bit easier to comprehend or something like that. It's less boring. I remember in school, I would say I liked history, but everyone else was like, oh, that's just boring, you know.
I got interested in history as a result of being interested in sociology. In fact, I have to say that to me, good history is the sociology of the past. This will probably exercise some historians listening, but it seems to me that the important thing we want to know about the past is, how did it shape us? What are the main things going on that caused us to be what we are like today? And going to Mississippi, which I did actually as an undergraduate for a semester, and then going back there as a faculty member.
Where were you in school when you went?
I was at Carleton College as an undergraduate. And
Minnesota?
In Minnesota. And I took my junior semester abroad, as it were. This was way back in 1963, and it was right after the Ole Miss riot. And I went to Mississippi State, which was then the largest all-white segregated institution of higher learning outside of South Africa. It did not have a single black student. In fact, the only black student in any white school in the state was one person, James Meredith, at Ole Miss. So that was a great time to go. It was a great time to see social change happening right before my eyes. And naturally, I got interested in the past.
How did you get to Carleton College in the first place? And how many African Americans were there at Carleton College?
When I went to Carleton College, I started in 1960. I applied from Illinois. It's not an unusual thing to do from the Midwest. I had good SAT scores and fairly good grades, and actually I had some family involvement at the college, so I had known about it. I went to school with a person who was the 6th black student in the history of the college, and the college was 100 years old. Now, since then, Carleton has done a much better job. I understand the school is now 8 or 9% black, which is quite good for a college located in rural Minnesota. That meant, however, that when I was a junior, I had almost no experience with black people, particularly in college. Actually, I did.
And look, that's not uncommon because there was a time where I'm here in New York, right, New York State, and I was talking to a nurse at the hospital who was from Wisconsin, right, and she was telling me that there are literally people in towns in Wisconsin where they've never in their whole entire life have seen a black person. They're prejudiced, she says, this can be because of this. They've never seen them. They have all kinds of stereotypes. They can say whatever they want. There's no one to answer to. And she was telling me that while they're there, you know, she's like, she has a friend that was 28 that had never seen a black person before unless it was on television or in a movie, you know, or watching their favorite college sports, you know. But she said you know, that allows that prejudice to still exist where they go off and they collect themselves and no one else is around to hold them accountable. No one else is to say, hey, look how, you know, this is still the same way right here. You know, it's I got people in my adopted side of the family that I don't talk to because they live in South Carolina and they still act like that's the kind of, you know, mentality that they're in. And it's no excuse because they know me and they know others in the state. But I know, you know, the Midwest section that they were talking about, especially up there near the Dakotas and some of those states no one likes to talk about, Montana. No one talks about Montana, but Montana's Native American and really Caucasian. And I found out that that's where, like, they have that whole camp set aside where, you know, the white militias move there and no one else is allowed to move there. And, you know, they basically govern themselves, you know, and they're just setting themselves up as their own city when stuff goes wrong, you know, so other whites can go and live there and they'll already have the guns, foods, and all that stuff backed up for them, you know, stuff like that. Anyways.
To some extent in high school, which is another reason I wanted to go to Mississippi. I wanted to learn about a society that was different from the Midwest in which I grew up.
What was the town in the Midwest you grew up in?
Decatur, Illinois.
What did your parents do there?
My father was a doctor. My mother was a housewife and then also a junior high school librarian.
What kind of family was it? How many brothers and sisters?
One sister
don't even know
are called American History, or something bland like that. They're called Rise of the American Nation, Triumph of the American Nation, The Great Experiment, The Great Republic, Land of the Free. These are real titles. What is that saying? I think that's saying that we are not just entering another subject. We are not just going to learn about history. We are going to salute it. We're going to salute the flag. It's going to be an exercise in...
And like when I'm watching this, I'm thinking about what I always thought about, but I thought about something differently. I thought about music. Music, right? It speaks to us, right? And country music is a brainwashing to salute the flag, love country, whether country, God, and family, right? Even though to them, when I absorb them, it's most of the time it's just country and beer, you know? They don't care about the family. They don't care about the women. They don't care about stuff like that. And I'm not saying all, but I'm saying I'm noticing the mindset is country. They try to tell you country, God, and family. That's why they'll go serve in the military, you know, get slaughtered, you know, and then want to come back here if they do survive and want us all to bow down and kiss their feet and, you know, and being all reverence because they're military men and women. And it's like, hey, I never asked you to go over there. I'd rather, if you're gonna do anything for your country, why don't you get those snakes and rats out of the White House and then Congress Hill and stuff like that, and get rid of the federal government all once and for all, you know. But you know, you get played out, and then you follow your part because you've been brainwashed to think that it's about wearing that red, white, and blue, and wearing that camouflage, and going over there and serving, and then coming back and then acting like you've done something when all you've done is just get played out by the same people that have been playing, you know, my people since they decided that, you know, we don't have a creator here protecting us no more, so we can be had, you know. That's honestly how I feel. That you can't, and then you look at rap music, or you look at what they call R&B nowadays, which is so shameful. But you look at that, and our music doesn't teach us to be patriotic, which I'm not saying it should, but it doesn't teach us to be patriotic. It doesn't teach us to be anything positive at all. There's nothing positive out of the music that they produce and tell us that, you know, this is what makes you black. You listen to this and you're black. Or if not, you know, white folks that want to be black, they can go around saying, oh, you're the whitest black man alive because you don't listen to rap music, and, you know, you're an anomaly to them, you know.
Nationalism. I think that's wrong, because I think we develop stronger citizens and certainly more knowledgeable about how we got where we are if we teach history with all of its dirt and its glory, with all of its questions, with its good guys and its bad guys, instead of only good guys. So how can a history teacher deal with that? People often ask me, what book do you recommend? I don't recommend a book. I don't know a history textbook that treats history the way a chemistry textbook treats chemistry as something to be studied, worth learning about, period. So I think that a good teacher has to use a history textbook, but then maybe from reading lies or from reading other works of secondary history, teach against that textbook. Get students thinking about it. Get students thinking about, why is the textbook leaving out this stuff? Why is it saying this one it's false, or this one it's not, when it's misleading?
This book is done by New Press.
Yes.
Who are they?
The New Press is a bunch of folks who were, as I understand it, thrown out of Pantheon when a millionaire named Newhouse took over Random House. And so for about the last 3 or 4 years, they have been a very interesting press. They get foundation grants. I think they call themselves a nonprofit commercial press, and they're the only such thing.
I want to skip ahead to the part where he talks about Thanksgiving, because I thought it was interesting. He does a lot. He talks a lot about time in Mississippi teaching to the black students and what they really took away from what they were raised as far as the textbooks teaching them is when it comes to history, and how just stuff like that. But so if you want to check this out, you can. But I want to skip ahead to what I thought was interesting when he starts talking about Thanksgiving.
Basically, as backup. I personally wouldn't teach a high school history or even a college history textbook in a course, because they cover so many things. There's no need to have 888 pages of all kinds of little details. I would rather focus on 10 or 12 major issues, chronologically arranged, that bring forth what the important points are that still have relevance to the present. But for teachers who do want to use a textbook, maybe they feel that they will get too much parental criticism if they don't. Or maybe they feel that there's all these little facts that their students are going to be asked on the SAT or on the New York Regents exam or something like that. Fine, I have no quarrel with using a textbook, so long as the teacher and helps the students learn against the textbook, put the textbook in perspective, critique the textbook for its omissions.
You have a picture in your book of a T-shirt that you can buy, you say, over at the Library of Congress, that has 6 different faces of Columbus on it.
Yes.
What's the point?
The point is, incidentally, it's my son, Nick, is modeling that T-shirt. The point of those 6 pictures that the Library of Congress makes is we don't know what Columbus looked like. There's no known picture, for sure, that was painted of him while he was alive. The 6 pictures are very different, one from another. This gets then into the question, why does each textbook include a picture of Columbus, a head and shoulders picture? And I think it's for the purpose of iconography, not inquiry. Unless you believe we can read character from EyeSet, I think these head and shoulders pictures are pretty boring in the first place. But in the case of Columbus, we don't even know what his eyes look like, so we certainly aren't reading anything from it that's legitimate. So why include it? Because it's heroic, because it's an exercise in hero worship. That's the point I'm making by including it, and I think that's kind of why they sell the textbook and the T-shirt.
Thanksgiving Day.
A wonderful day. What about it?
Where does it stand in history?
Well, that's very interesting. A lot of people think, of course, that Thanksgiving goes back to 1620, to the Pilgrims, that we've had Thanksgiving Day ever since. I gave a whole talk for an hour at the Smithsonian about Thanksgiving a year and a half ago. The first point to know about Thanksgiving is that it was actually invented by Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. And the first Thanksgiving that is in our modern series happened in 1863. And it was basically giving thanks for the slow victory of the troops, particularly that previous summer in Vicksburg and at Gettysburg. And the fact that the Union was going to be held together and that slavery was going to be ended. But it's maybe more interesting to go back to ask the question, what were the Pilgrims really thankful for?
And as Lex will point out, slavery, as far as, agricultural slavery ended to some degree, but the slavery switched to a industry, textile industry type of slavery for us. So it didn't end. I mean, as we know today, it still hasn't ended. Just look at the Constitution for California. If anyone's caught doing a crime, then you are allowed to legally be enslaved. Literally, it's in their constitution.
And this gets into the issue of the famous plague. But I shouldn't say the famous plague because almost nobody's ever heard of it. This is the plague of 1617 or 1618. Happened just 2 or 3 years before the Pilgrims set foot in Massachusetts. And it was a plague of enormous proportions. In fact, I used the perhaps unfortunate one-liner that it made the Black Death in Europe pale by comparison. The Black Death killed 1 out of every 3 Europeans over a period of 3 years. This plague in Massachusetts killed between 90 and 96% of all the people living there.
I think it's interesting because Massachusetts is a state where they said Indians are not supposed to be enslaved, but there's hardly any Indians there to speak of when you look back in history. So I just think that's interesting. At least it's the way they try to present it, is there's hardly any Indians there to speak of.
These people, these of course were Indian people. And so the Pilgrims were very aware of this. In fact, King James, the king who of course commissioned the King James Version of the Bible, he called it that wondrous plague among the salvages, because back then they...
Did you hear that? The wondrous, wonderful. Then we got to go to the etymology of the word wonderful, or wondrous is how he pronounces it, but we know what that means. I mean, that's like glory. That's like, that's like a, you see, someone parts the Red Sea and he did something wonderful. You donate $1,000 to a church and they say, oh, aren't you so wonderful? It's not in a negative term.
Spell savages with an L. And various Pilgrim and Puritan leaders considered that this plague and some later plagues were sent by God to wipe out the Indians' title to this place and confer it onto the...
Hear that? Sent by God to wipe out the Indians' title to the place. We know that Indos leads back to, Christopher Columbus' Indos leads back to what? God's people, right? We know if we go to Amos 9:7, King James Bible, if you want to use that, and it says there, aren't you not like the Ethiopians under me? We know that, what's his name over there? Hernando de Soto, in that book, Discovery of Florida, says I've seen Indians in Florida that look no different than the Ethiopians. They did not have long hair. They had short, woolly hair. They were tall. We know that the definition of Native American were copper-colored people, correct? I mean, and then we got the whole Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, and Deuteronomy 32, laying it out, piece it all together. A certain group of people would be enslaved in their own land, and they would lose it, while a nation that's not a nation would rule over them, that's what the United States is, right? The United States is not a nation, it's a corporation.
To the Pilgrims, and it's one of the reasons, therefore, most likely, that the Pilgrims ended up in Massachusetts rather than in Virginia, where they were thinking of going, or in Guyana, which they were actually contemplating. They get to Massachusetts, and what the students all know about it is that they had a tough winter, and then an Indian named Squanto comes along. And Squanto can speak English miraculously, and he helps them plant fish heads among the corn, and it grows tall, and the rest is all Thanksgiving. And what's ironic about that story is that Squanto himself provides a wonderful hook, a wonderful point of entry to the whole plague story. The plague is one of the most...
Now listen to this. Isn't it interesting? Because he's going to start describing slavery, right? Check this out. And we know, when we think about, blacks when they had their papers proving they were free, and then you had the first, the police, but they weren't the police. They were the first patrolmen, and they would take the papers and enslave them anyways.
Most important geopolitical events happening anywhere on the earth in the first quarter of the 1600s, because it means that nobody's going to oppose the British settlement of Massachusetts. In fact, the Indians are going to welcome it. And Squanto played the following role. He missed the plague. Why? Because he had been enslaved, probably...
See that? There's the first one. He missed it because he was enslaved. Ready?
Twice.
Probably twice. Listen to this.
Quite possibly taken once to England, spent several years there.
And remember, there was that painting, what's it called? St. Mary's of the Good Winds Church, where they show Christopher Columbus. It was supposed to be him bringing the first Indians there to England, or, back to Europe. I'm sorry, it says Europe, right? So and we see the Indians, and they know they look like us. They don't look like people that get to call themselves Native Americans, right? Right, so he's first enslaved. We're taken over there. You weren't brought from Africa here. The Indians were taken out of here and taken to Europe.
In the service of a rich man, who then finally sent him back to Massachusetts. Then he gets enslaved again in about 1617.
Do you hear that? You're enslaved twice. Now it's the third time being enslaved. How's that any different than what our ancestors go through, especially with that state of South Carolina, when it comes down to the patrolmen, the first policemen, the French policemen, or whatever, staying along the highways, and if you look, Negro, they would arrest you, and take your papers. Even if you had freeman status, they would take it and tear it up and then find a way to sell you into slavery. And then they say, "Oh, I'm rich," when the Bible says, that's wrong. Like it literally says, well, what was it? Wicked is he that says I am rich when he does these things. I gotta find those verses.
Taken to Malaga, Spain, enslaved there. He escapes from slavery in Malaga. He escapes from Spain, makes his way to Britain, talks his way back to Massachusetts on a fishing boat. Actually took him 2 trips because the first boat only went to Newfoundland and he thought maybe he could get a ride from Newfoundland to Massachusetts. Couldn't do it, went back to Britain. This man has been across the Atlantic 6 times. He's more traveled than any pilgrim. And yet what the textbooks say, one textbook, for instance, I quote, says, he had learned English, he explained, from passing British fishermen. Period. That's all they say. Well, I guess that's true, although they not only passed, they sold him into slavery in England and into Spain. Well, he missed the play. He gets set back onto American soil. He walks to his home village, only to make the unbelievable discovery that every person there is a corpse. And it's at this point that the Pilgrims come on the scene. He's a man without a tribe. His community is ended. That's why he throws in his lot with the Pilgrims. Now that's a story. That's a story with some drama. It's a lot better than this pious thing about planting the corn and planting the fish heads in the corn and it grew tall. And he was.
So if you want to check this out, this is called American History Textbooks, Lies, Everything Your Teacher Got Wrong. So, and just check this out if you would like. I thought it was pretty interesting. It's a long one, but it's pretty interesting. Because it seems like this guy's on the up and up. Anyways, M.W. Smith, and I'm out, everybody.